You're listening to the Good Food CFO podcast, where we challenge the status quo of the food industry, celebrate good food founders who are building businesses on their own terms, introduce industry disruptors, and are redefining equitability. If you're ready to build your financial confidence and join the good food revolution to change the way the food industry does business, you are in the right place. I'm the Good Food CFO and your host, Sarah Delevan. I'm joined once again by our producer, Chelsea Steer, and we're really excited today because we are not only talking about a book that has had a big impact on me and certain aspects of how we run our businesses. I also think it has really big implications for founders who are striving to build a business truly on their own terms.
Yeah, and not just that, Sarah, we're also announcing the launch of the Good Food CFO Book Club and a new partnership that will help our listeners and community members purchase the books that we're recommending in the book club from independent bookstores while also supporting the podcast.
There's so much to cover today. Where do you think we should get started?
So I want to start by talking about Sarah, the reader. Okay. Because Sarah, you are always reading a book, and I know when it's a particularly good book because you cannot stop talking about it. You want to read me passages from it. You want to talk about the ideas that they are sharing in the book and really dive deep into that conversation. And then usually that will turn into a podcast episode, right? You did it with Profit First. We did it with Small Giants. And most recently, we did it with the book Traction. And a lot of times people will reach out to you, right? And tell you that either they're reading the book currently or they've read it in the past. And again, it always sparks conversation and wanting to dive deeper into the ideas, the concepts, and the content of these books. And that's really what inspired us to start this book club.
Yeah, as you said, I am an avid reader. I like to read at least one book a month.
Yeah.
Read in the mornings is sort of like what I like to do. And you're right. If I find a book that just really strikes a chord with me, I will talk to anyone and everyone about it. I love talking to other founders who have read the book. We always inevitably have slightly different takeaways or aha moments from it. And there's just so much like fun energy and learning in those conversations. And like so many things, you know, when you have a bunch of different conversations or sort of siloed conversations, if you will, right? I start to think like, instead of having 5 separate conversations, why don't we have one community conversation? And it just seemed like the right like next step was to start a book club.
Yeah, I love that. So I know we're going to announce the first book selection for the book club in just a moment. You're going to tell us really why this is the first book that you've chosen for the book club. And then 6 weeks from now, we're actually going to hold our very first Fireside Chat book club conversation, where we will get to come together as a community and talk about the book that we're talking about here today on the episode. Fireside Chats happen inside the Good Food CFO community and are open to all members. And they're a way for us to discuss key takeaways from the book, how it impacted you as the reader, or how it impacted your business, right? It's a way for us to get together and ask questions or talk about ideas that may have come up from reading the book. And just like any other fireside chat, like I said, it's open to everyone, and we want everyone to come and share. Fireside chats inside our community are really about that connection. Anybody can raise their hand, come up on stage, and say what's on their mind. So I'm super excited about that, you know, the fireside chat being the format that we've chosen for our book club.
Yeah, I think it's the perfect format and such a like relaxed way and fun way to get together. So
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to our first session, as you said, 6 weeks from now.
Yeah.
Hi, this is Katie Melezova, your food brand strategist. You may have heard my conversation with Sarah on the last episode of the podcast. I will be joining Sarah live inside the Good Food CFO Community on Tuesday, November 7th to answer your questions and continue the conversation from the episode. This live Q&A is available to all Good Food CFO Plus members. If you're not a Plus member yet, you can upgrade by visiting thegoodfoodcfo.com/join. With your Plus membership, you'll get access to live Q&As like this one, exclusive bonus content, and even attend live podcast recordings. You can upgrade to Plus membership for only $12 a month or save money by purchasing an annual membership at $99. Just visit thegoodfoodcfo.com/join to learn more, and I'll see you on November 7th.
All right. Well, Sarah, I can't wait any longer. Why don't you go ahead and tell us what you've chosen as the first book for our book club?
The first selection for the official The Good Food CFO Book Club is Stolen Focus by Johann Hari. I hope I'm pronouncing his last name correctly. This book has had such a big impact on me and the way that I think about running my businesses and how our teams function as a team. And I think just big implications for any founder who truly wants to build a business on their own terms. But before we dive into why I think those things, I want to share a little bit of a backstory. So a couple of weeks before I picked up this book, I was watching a podcast called Blocks. My husband loves comedians, and I find myself like watching their podcasts with him. And Neil Brennan did a stand-up special called Blocks, where he talks about the things in his life that are blocks. They make him feel lonely or isolated or cause him to find sort of his day-to-day life difficult. And it was a really popular special. And he started a podcast where he invites guests to talk about their blocks. And I love this podcast because I think it provides an amazing insight into just humanity and humans and how we all are dealing with something as we go through life. And he had Tom Segura on. And if you're not familiar with Tom, he's a comedian as well, successful businessman. And he was talking about one of his blocks being not knowing what he likes. And he gave this example of being in a store and buying a shirt and realizing that he didn't know if he liked the shirt or if he was buying it because other people would like the shirt. And then he sort of expanded out from there and he was like, I don't know if any of the things that I like wear or buy or have are because I like them or not. And I was stopped in my tracks by this. Like, first of all, he's a successful business person. He's a successful comedian. He appears to have like opinions and like a very clear like idea of who he is externally. So I was really surprised to hear this. And then I was asking myself, how does this happen? This idea of losing who you are and not knowing what you like fascinated me. And it actually occupied a lot of space in my mind for several weeks. That alone was something that I talked to a lot of people about. I talked to my husband about it. I talked to you about it, Chelsea, because it was like, how does this happen? So then when I picked up the book at an airport, I had a really long layover. I was flying from the East Coast back to LA. I picked up the book and I started reading. And it was one of those books where by page 13, I was underlining because things were just really having an impact on me, like right from the beginning. And I want to share something from page 13 of the book that I was underlining like feverishly while sitting in the airport.
Okay.
So Johann talked about a study of office workers in the United States that found that most of them never get 1 hour of uninterrupted work in a typical day. In fact, most people get a maximum of 28 minutes of focused work in a day.
28 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
You say that and that feels shocking. Like my initial reaction is to be shocked by that.
Mm-hmm.
But then I think back to working now, wasn't technically in like an office environment, but even managing a retail store, right? And on my days that were admin days that I was in the office the whole day,
Yeah.
I don't even know if I got 28 minutes of focus.
Yeah. But it gets even more interesting. So he goes on to say that if this goes on for months or years, so in your case, like think of how long you worked at Starbucks. Okay. If this goes on for months and years, it actually scrambles our ability to figure out who you are and what you want. You become lost in your own life.
Mm-hmm.
Like just needed to stop, needed to pause, and was like, oh, this is how Tom Segura didn't know what kind of shirt he liked. Is this happening to me? Is this happening to my husband and to my friends? This idea that distraction can actually cause you to lose sight of who you are and become lost in your own life it just consumed my mind. And I was like, I must keep reading. And he shares in the book that there are signs that you're losing yourself. And I'm going to share these because a couple of them resonated with me. And I think maybe a few will resonate with our listeners and maybe even you, Chelsea, as well.
Mm-hmm.
So he says that you become obsessed with petty goals or dependent on simplistic signals from the outside world. So think things like retweets, likes, shares, right? Those types of things. You lose yourself in a cascade of distractions. So I definitely, from time to time put a little bit too much weight, I think, on the reactions on social media that our business posts get. But for me, what really hit me was this cascade of distractions sign, because I cannot tell you how many times a day I pick up my phone for a specific use and find myself lost either, on Instagram. And I didn't intend to go there. And after a few minutes, I think, I don't really know how long I would be, scrolling for, I realized, wait a second, I came here to use the calculator. I'm in the middle of doing something.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was the second point where I was like, worried about that you can get lost in your own life. And now I was recognizing the signs within myself.
Yeah. When I was still with Starbucks, and especially in the last couple of years that I was there, I did become really obsessed with being the best, right? Having the best X window
Right.
time, customer experience, rating, like those things.
Yeah.
And when I did not achieve that, right? When I was not number one,
Right.
it was devastating to my identity.
Yeah.
And yeah, does it really matter if we're the fastest, or does it matter if every customer that comes through our drive-through feels like we took the time to get to know them and care about them and deliver them a good quality product?
Yeah. I think that's such a great example because it's like you're getting lost. You're getting lost in the purpose, right?
Yeah.
What is the real purpose? You are just zeroing in on, and what I'm seeing here is like things that other people
Mm-hmm.
will be able to see that you are number one at, right? Somebody in the next Starbucks down the road may not see or know how great of a customer experience you are giving to every car, but they will see maybe right in the rankings if
Mm-hmm.
your store has the number one speed. So initially, I thought that the author was going to focus on social media alone in this book and how we needed to and can, break our habits. And if I needed to do that to not lose myself or to find myself like whole again, I was going to keep reading.
Mm-hmm.
But while he does spend a good amount of time there for good reason, it is not just about social media. And in fact, he has identified 12 of what he calls deep forces that are damaging our attention. And there are real steps that we can take to reduce the problem for ourselves. And long before, well before he gets into the subject of big tech and how they do indeed manipulate our focus, he discusses things like how multitasking affects our focus, right? We've touched on that a little bit already. That creativity and our ability to remember are affected by multitasking. And he shares studies on the effects of as he calls it, the crippling of our flow states, the rise of physical and mental exhaustion, the collapse of sustained reading. This happened to me as well. And the disruption of mind wandering. And so he talks about how all of these things are also aiding in our losing our focus. Social media has ramped it up and really accelerated it. But these things have been happening and sort of crumbling or crippling, more and more over time.
What you just said, the crippling of our flow states, right, as a side effect of this. And when you talk about losing yourself, right, and losing the ability to know, like, what do you like or want, or what is your opinion?
Yeah.
That relates so much to being in a state of flow, right? It's something that I myself have been trying or striving to understand for a while now, of how to get back in flow or how to be in flow. And so I find that really fascinating, that that's a piece of it.
Yeah. And he talks about, so one of the big things that he talks about in terms of technology, right, is like when you omit something from your life, like if it, let's say you're going to, put the phone down to help as a part of regaining your focus, you can't just then sit next to your phone, right? Part of it has to be, sort of getting back to these things. And so one of them is getting back to your flow state. And he talks about, what does it mean to be in a flow state? How do you get into a flow state? Right. And so he's not just saying this is bad, right? These are the things that are wrong with us. He's saying this is how we can get back into it. How do we avoid physical and mental exhaustion, the collapse of sustained reading. I mean, this is why I recommitted myself to reading one book per month. Because it is a very grounding experience for me. He talks a lot about the science of like physical active reading and your eyes and just like the physical benefits of that. And you actually get that also from watching like long format TV shows, which is great for some people who maybe don't love to read. And he goes into the book about that and how that differs from like the fast pace of change in social media. It's really, really fascinating. But thinking back through my career, thinking about hustle mentality, thinking about mainstream business media, right? They all promote the destruction of what we learn in this book are very important to our focus and ultimately knowing who we are and what we want in our lives. And so the reason that this book is the first choice for the book club is because we're asking people, or we're working to support people in building a business on their own terms. And if we don't know who we are and what we want, we cannot do that. And so I just think that it's such a powerful book and such a great place to start for so many people, myself included.
I'm definitely excited to read it.
So the most poignant part of the book for me, and this is the section that I read out loud during our recent quarterly team meeting, is very near the end of the book, where he shares findings from James Williams, who is a former Google strategist, and he quotes him throughout the book. But Williams has spent 3 years studying focus specifically, and he has come to believe that attention takes 3 different forms, all of which are being stolen. So I'm going to read this from the book now, and I just think that it's extremely powerful. So he says, the first layer of focus is called our spotlight. And this is when you focus on immediate actions like I'm going to walk into the kitchen and make a cup of coffee. You want to see what's in the refrigerator. You want to use the calculator on your phone. It's called the spotlight because it involves narrowing down your focus. If your spotlight gets distracted or disrupted, you are prevented from carrying out the near-term actions like the ones I just described, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I know that my spotlight focus has been disrupted because when I go to pick up my phone to use the calculator, I end up on Instagram instead of on the calculator, right? So for me, just speaking of my own experience, I saw this in myself. The second layer of focus is called starlight. This is the focus you can apply to your longer term goals, right? Your projects over time. Maybe you want to write a book. Maybe you want to set up your business. You want to increase sales. It's called starlight because when you feel lost, you can look up to the stars and you remember the direction that you're traveling in. He says, if you become distracted from your starlight, you lose sight of the longer term goals you have, and you start to forget where you are headed. This resonated with me because, we have quarterly meetings and I set quarterly goals. And between quarterly meetings, I realized that I had these very clear intentions and I had these very clear goals, but I got sidetracked from them somehow. Right. And we see this happening with the founders that we work with and that we coach when we say, like, what kind of business do you want to build? What direction are you headed in? Right. And they don't have a clear path, or they say, well, I want to do this, but I'm getting distracted, in the process. And that also very closely relates to the third layer of focus, which Williams calls our daylight. So this is the form of focus that makes it possible for you to know what your longer term goals are in the first place. So how do you know you want to write a book? How do you know you want to grow your business in a certain way? How do you know you like a classic style versus a preppy style, right? He calls it daylight because it's only when a scene is flooded with daylight that you can see the things around you most clearly. If you get so distracted that you lose your sense of the daylight, in many ways, you may not even be able to figure out who you are, what you wanted to do, or where you want to go. Williams has come to believe that our attention crisis is depriving us of all three of these forms of focus, and we are losing our light.
Yeah, this is really powerful. And it's speaking directly to me. I mean, as I listen to you describe each type of the light, right? I was able to see the impact that each of those had in my life, right? Or where I am kind of missing out in each of those areas. And quite frankly, it's kind of making me sad, as I sit here, but I also hopeful, like also to be able to put a word to what I'm feeling or thinking, and to know that this book is available for me to read and kind of gain some more understanding around what I can do about it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll share, because, in hopes of it inspiring folks to pick up this book and then to join us in the book club, that, a couple weeks after implementing some of these things. And so for me, starting to read again in the morning, making sure I have some quiet time to journal, even if it's just 5 minutes, just like a little bit of time with pen and paper, moving my body on a daily basis, right? So it doesn't have to be a strenuous workout, but it has to be movement of some kind. And he talks about, like, that's part of getting into flow, right? Doing something that makes you a bit uncomfortable, which I found really, really interesting. After a few weeks of practicing these things and really doing my best, was it perfect? No. Did I still find myself scrolling from time to time? Absolutely. But I also found myself sitting on the floor in my office with a giant sticky notepad, writing out my long-term goals, those starlight goals. What is it that I want, that I, over the last couple of months, accidentally somehow lost sight of just because of the day-to-day, the day-to-day things that need to be taken care of, the distractions that are happening, right? I feel like I had lost that focus to go, okay, these are the things that need to get done. And these are the things I'm working toward long term. And so writing those goals out felt like a big win for me because I was refocusing and sort of reclaiming, yeah, these are the things that I want to do long term. And with that, then you can go, what are the things I need to do daily to make this a reality, to make these dreams that I have a reality? And that's why you and I talk so much about our vision and goal setting course, right?
Yep.
Because when you can write down or visualize, this is what I want to create, then it becomes very easy to say, here are the things I need to do. What's the next right thing?
Yeah, it's that like kind of working backwards thing, right?
Right. But what I realized after reading Stolen Focus is that we're asking some people to do something they can't do. They're not able to do because they may not have a clear idea of what they really want. And I'll share another example from, real life, from business. When I was first starting out as a consultant, I saw people around me having success with online courses and building a business in a specific way, and they are making money seemingly and were appearing to be successful. And I thought, well, that's the way it's working for them. That must be the way that I need to do it. And I invested a lot of money in learning and building the infrastructure, for that style of business, only to find that that wasn't really what I wanted.
Yeah.
I didn't want to give up my one-on-one consulting. I wanted to keep that as part of my business. And so it was a lesson in going down a road and then realizing that exact picture, that exact way of building a business was not for me. And I hope that not everyone has to have an expensive experience like that, and that they can do some of the work, on their own, inspired by this book, to figure out what they truly want and build a business that is their dream business and that, aligns with how they want to live their lives day to day. Chelsea, I got to talk with our colleague, Lindsay O'Donnell of Piquant Marketing, about Stolen Focus. And here's a little clip of our conversation. Thank you for being here, Lindsay.
Thank you for having me.
You and I read Stolen Focus at like the same, pretty much the same time. I was traveling from the East Coast back to the West Coast of the United States, and I had read it. And I feel like when I landed here and opened up Instagram, you had read it while on a trip as well.
Yeah.
And I was talking to every single person that I knew. It was like a part of our quarterly meeting with the team. And you were like, just like shouting it from the rooftops on Instagram about the book. So why did you pick up the book? I'm curious, like if you had heard about it from someone.
Yeah, I think I just saw it. Yeah. I mean, it's like the kind of book I would gravitate to, but yeah, I didn't. And then it was like, I don't know, when you were like read something, you're just like, why is everyone not talking about this?
Yeah, that's how I felt too. I'm curious what some of your biggest takeaways from the book were, or what impacted you the most.
It's funny because I feel like there's so many things in all areas of life that you just can't quite put your finger on, and getting to like a certain age and like having a lot of life events happen to me recently, it was really hard for me to tell if I couldn't sleep, or I was feeling kind of down. Like, I feel like at this age, you're like, am I low iron or am I dying? You know what I mean? And it's really hard. And so reading the book was like, oh my God, like there's so like, technology has impact on you, it kind of like shortens your attention span, but to have it so clearly laid out and to see the effects of it, and then coming back and like really challenging myself to only pick up my phone with intention. It's interesting because it's easy and then it's hard. Like you'll put your phone down and then you'll be like, I'm going to cook, I'm going to read. And then an hour and a half later, you're just like drumming your fingers and you're like, well, maybe I'll like I like take Chinese lessons on my phone, or maybe I'll check this. It's like, that's when it gets hard, when you're like, you go through the stuff, and like being able to just like sit and listen to your thoughts. There was some terms that I've like really referenced quite a bit that I find so interesting, like cruel optimism.
Remind me.
So that was because, again, like I feel like there's so many things in our life where we just like can't verbalize, or we don't have the terms. And cruel optimism, the example he used was like when the odds are stacked against you, but the onus is on you, like he was the health industry in the book. So he was like, we are told if you just commit, if you just motivate, you can have a great body, you can be in shape. And yeah, that's true, but the odds are stacked to get you. Junk food is so cheap. We're expected to work 40 to 50 hours. We're stressed. We can't afford life. So like, yeah, a few people are able to break through, but instead of like changing the system that's against you and that is not realistic for a lot of people, we use cruel optimism. And he used that in the book about technology, where they're like, well, you can turn off notifications, you can do this, instead of like looking at the technology that is kind of predatory.
Yeah. One of the things I found fascinating was that he did talk a lot, like many kind of chapters from what I remember devoted to technology. And I had watched the documentary that he referenced in the book. So I was like reading it, but I was kind of like, I've already absorbed this information. So what I was really gravitating to in the book was the point he was making about how there are so many other things in our life and that are stealing our focus as well as technology. And that it's not, oh, this generation's issue. It's actually been happening. It happens, just with like the way society has evolved. It's just that technology has really ramped it up and made it, so much more intense that the loss of focus has become a very serious issue.
Yeah. And the one thing that I found like very terrifying, but also resonated as so true, is that people can't discern real threats anymore. Like, why haven't we all banded together for global warming the way we did with the ozone? And it's because we're so overloaded and everything seems like a high level. That was really scary, but that really resonated with me, where I was like, I don't understand. Like we have these wildfires, we have these things that are at our doors that are like apocalyptic. And at the same time, we're still like arguing about like, smaller things. I don't know about you, but like since then, I've also noticed how often I do want to be numb.
Oh,
You know,
yeah.
I mean? Like I'll like pick up like my phone in between work and I'll play a game, or I'll do the thing where I'll put my phone down and I'm like, I don't want to be here with my thoughts. Like I do want to numb out. And so I've just like really noticed how often I'm craving that addiction.
Yeah. And it's like, and I think that partially comes from the overload and the overwhelm, right? Where you're like, I can't take in any more, but because our brain, it was very interesting when he was talking about how, like, if you go to work, and this really resonated with me because my husband has like Slack and stuff in his office. And he's like, when he was working from home during the pandemic, he was like constantly typing on the Slack message. And I was like, how do you get any work done? And he's like, it's really hard because there's constantly like this thing pinging up at me all of the time. And so I don't use that kind of technology in my day to day, but thinking about how like people who are living in the kind of work environment 8+ hours a day, switching from this to that, the Slack thing is popping up, right? You're constantly moving. Then when you leave work, your brain is actually like craving that same bouncing all around, and that it's very hard to go to calm and to get focused. And so it makes perfect sense that even when you're wanting to numb and like not read anymore, not see any more news, and just like we call it like resting, your brain is still going to give me this thing that's going to change my attention, very rapidly. And that I think is one of the things that stuck with me, is like we actually don't have that much control over our brains, not as much as we think we do.
Yeah. And that fact where he said most people only get 28 minutes of uninterrupted work all day was stunning, but not surprising. And I really notice it now, because I always thought like, oh, I just have a busy mind, I'm stressed. But lately I haven't been stressed, and I still like, I lay down for like 10 minutes and I have to get up, and I'm like, I think it's like literally that ping pong effect where I'm like, I just think that I can't, my brain like, and it's, we know about decision fatigue. We've known about that for a long time, but that's sort of like, that amped up like ping pong, how it affects you like later when you want to rest, like your brain is trained like that.
If you were in conversation with, I think particularly a founder, like a business owner, they haven't read the book yet, what would you tell them?
I think it's like, I found more and more that it's okay to step back, and when you step up to it with intention. There's a coach and a businesswoman, Ariana Fotinakis. I hope I'm saying her last name right. But, I remember working with her, and like she had a membership and she was just like, I hate Facebook. I don't want to be on Facebook. And I remember just being like, don't be on Facebook. Like, it's not going to work,
Yeah.
you know? And she stepped back, and that, like, at the time it was like, you can't grow a membership and not be on Facebook. And she did. And so I just think, like, pick somewhere that like really feeds your soul, show up with intention. That's what I'm trying to do with like Instagram, is like, okay, I've like set aside 15 minutes. I'm going to engage and find my people. And then I'm not going to scroll. Like, in that 15 minutes, I might scroll or whatever. And so I just think, like, you know, it's so noisy out there anyway. Showing up mindlessly or showing up just for the sake of showing up, like, I don't think it's really going to work anyway. I still feel like people are really craving authentic connections, as cliche as that sounds. And I just, like, I think it's okay to step back and not feel like you're not putting out 100 tweets a day, 2 reels a day. So yeah. And I don't know, like, being an entrepreneur is not for the faint of heart. So like, you really need to invest in your like mental health and clarity. So that was a long-winded piece of advice.
No, I think it's great. And I think, you know, I'm very much trying to convince people to read this book. So we are starting a book club, and I was like, this has to be the first book.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because to me, building a business on your own terms, right, which is exactly what you're describing. If you don't want to be on Facebook, then don't be on Facebook. Do things the way you want. Like, why put yourself through something that you're like that you are against, or you don't like, or whatever, it makes you uncomfortable, whatever it is. And I think that it's very easy to get lost and to think, oh, I have to do these things. This is the way that it's done. And that to me was a huge takeaway from the book, is that when we regain our focus, it's almost like we have more agency, we have more clarity about what we want. And then more, I think, I don't know if courage is the right word, but, you know, maybe it is, like, to create the life that we want. And to me, I think that might be the biggest takeaway from the book, was like, there was a moment where I was like, oh shit, what do I want?
Yeah. Yeah.
Me, if I don't consider anyone else, what do I want? And there are so many founders that I work with who I say, you know, I ask them, what's the vision for your business? What do I want to build? And they don't have a clear idea.
Interesting.
And, you know, some people will say, well, I'm just getting started, and so I don't have it all figured out. And it's like, of course you don't have it all figured out, but you're starting something without an idea of what you want to create and why.
Yeah.
And I think that you should have that. You should know your why, and you should know what you want to build, at least in, how do I want my day-to-day to be?
Yeah.
You know, and I think that this book just really, I don't know, solidified for me the importance of that, and how easy it is for us to lose the ability to have that for ourselves.
Well, like I said, Sarah, I can't wait to read the book. So I'm going to have to order it online. And I wanted to talk a little bit about how we're actually making the book available to our book club.
Yeah, so this is super exciting. This is something we've been working on for a while now. And I'm really excited to announce that we have partnered with bookshop.org. Now, they are a certified B Corp working to connect readers with independent booksellers all over the world. And not only that, they give over 80% of their profit margin directly to independent bookstores. So this partnership feels very aligned with our mission and our values. And specifically, when you purchase through the Good Food CFO Bookshop, Bookshop contributes 10% of the sale to the Good Food CFO in support of this podcast, and 10% to the Bookshop profit share that goes to all independent stores who are members of bookshop.org.
Well, so if anybody in the audience listening now is interested in reading Stolen Focus and joining us for the book club, you can purchase the book by visiting thegoodfoodcfo.com and then click on Bookshop in the navigation menu. And it'll take you right to our bookshop, our Good Food CFO Bookshop.
Yeah. And right now, in addition to Stolen Focus, we also have Small Giants, Profit First, and Traction available for purchase in the Good Food CFO Bookshop. I'm so excited about this. I hope that those of you listening will join us in reading this book and then join us on December 12th for our very first book club Fireside Chat.
For more content like this, in connection with other good food founders and industry experts, join us inside the Good Food CFO community. Visit thegoodfoodcfo.com/join to learn more.
Thank you for joining us here today. If you enjoyed this episode or found it helpful or inspiring in any way, please share it with your founder friends on social and rate and review the podcast wherever you listen. It's the #1 way to help good food founders find the show. We'll be back with a brand new episode next week.